It's pretty late, and I just received the most interesting email, and I'm going to go through what's in the email. So, remember all this work that we did on command responsibility, demonstrating that certain people like Fruin, General Fruin, are in command responsibility here as the task force commander of all of this. And let's not forget that Angus Campbell, the disgrace of Afghanistan, is also in that line of authority. Let's also not forget that the Governor General, going through Hurley and now into the woke one, are also in that line of authority. When you take an oath to something foreign and then attack the people on the land, you are in that line of authority. So let's have a look here at what I've been sent. So most of you know that I worked in a council, so I kind of know what's going on here. And I kind of expected this to come. I totally expected this to come because they couldn't get away with this forever. What they did was one of the most serious and heinous offences that could ever have been committed. All 537 Australian councils to receive DNA contamination report. So Port Headland in Western Australia saw to sitting at a council meeting to discuss the poisoning that had occurred amongst all of their residents, obviously hearing lots of tragedy along the way. So let's go through this article. Of course, there's going to be opposition, but here we have 7 councillors. 5 of them have voted for, but we have 2 that have voted against, namely the Mayor and this lady Rebello. I don't know why they would want to deny informing their residents of the facts. Trying to hide something from your constituents could be considered to be a crime, especially when you have a duty of care in that office. So this is quite a lengthy article, so bear with me. We're going to go through the entire thing, so we might be here for a little while. So this article starts off with, let me begin by asking, please excuse the French, how do you piss off 537 Australian councils and there are over 5,000 councillors? Now, in each state, councils run differently. Some councils have councillors, some councils have aldermen, but all councils have a Lord Mayor, and all councils have either a general manager or a CEO managing the executive branch of that council like a bank. So how do you piss off the entire council population of Australia? So how do you piss them off? First, you, as part of the Canberra mob, lock down all their districts in 2020, 2021 and 2022. Second, being the Canberra mob, you don't ask permission, you don't pick up the phone to a single council. No, being the Canberra mob, you just pay off all the state and territory governments to tell the councils and their councillors to heal, to shut up, to obey the experts in Canberra, the Canberra mob. Third, being the Canberra mob, orders are sent, coerce, coercion, coercing all the residents of the local council districts to receive experimental gene therapies, which the Canberra mob do not tell anyone are also GMOs. Fourth, you as the Canberra mob send more orders, mandating that a significant number of residents in every council district must, in capitals, receive the experimental gene therapies if they want to keep their jobs, if they want to see grandma and grandpa, while again not telling anyone the vile vials contain GMOs. Then later, after they are forced these liquids into the bodies of over 20 million Australians, into the residents of your local council district, the same Canberra mob learn their needles contained grotesque amounts of synthetic DNA contamination. Synthetic DNA contamination injected. So we'll go slide by slide. So the Canberra mob is the command line authority that I have pointed out that has a command responsibility and is obligated to follow rules that were forged out of a Nuremberg. And this is the unfortunate truth of the matter. This has been a military exercise, and the Canberra mob are merely puppets. Puppets. Anthony Albanese is following the bidding of foreign interests. The military are doing the bidding of those foreign interests. People like Angus Campbell are responsible to those foreign interests. So they didn't ask permission. They committed a war crime. Okay? They didn't pay off the states. I have demonstrated in my videos how they changed command line responsibility by removing your emergency services and putting you on the front line before they attacked you with this poison. And they did coerce you. They did manipulate you. They did gaslight you. They did plan to put genetically modified sequences into those jabs because they attempted to put a cattle tag marker in your DNA. If you go to the American websites and look up the court case relative to what is a non-natural genetic sequence, you will see that these sequences were patented by Pfizer, Moderna, and so on. If you look after that, a year later, all these companies went to court battling over those very patents. If you look at the HSBC, they advertised that your DNA would become your data, and they have poisoned everyone while trying to install that genetic sequence into your bodies. This would have given each one of you a unique identifying code in your DNA. This is why they used an rDNA injection to corrupt that cell so that they could force this sequence back into it. So let's move on to the next slide. Synthetic DNA contamination injected into the children of your local area, into the babies born in your local area, into your elderly, into your children, into your brothers and sisters, into your mothers and fathers, into your grandmothers and grandfathers. Trillions of cancer-causing fragments in every shot. Trillions of cancer-causing fragments multiplied by over 63 million doses the Canberra mob caused to be injected into the residents of every local council district across the country. One dose after another, and another. After telling everyone they, and only they, were the health experts. But then a group of honest experts really look, at what was in those 63 million shots and find a shit ton of DNA contamination. Then, when the Canberra mob learn about this grotesque DNA contamination from this group of honest experts, that Canberra mob says, nothing. 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 That, folks, is soon going to be the realisation of over 5,000 Australian councillors. Soon to learn that Tony Albanese was fully briefed on Australia's DNA contamination crisis by Russell Broadbent MP and others. Critical health information impacting all of Australia's local government residents. Now, some of those 5,000 Australian councillors are evil sons of bitches. Isn't that right, Rex Mooney? You have a bunch of councillors that have been placed into your councils through some sort of employment structure. Cooktown knows this very well after they refused to hire a local Lord Mayor and instead imported one from Western Australia. Or was that the CEO? I can't remember. But this is how they manipulate you, by selling your local government contracts to different states so that the people that are running your council aren't familiar with you and they run them like a bank. This could be said of the police force as well, where the local police have never lived in your area. And Tony, Don of the Canberra mob, currently said nothing, is saying nothing. That, good folks, is how you piss off 537 councils and their over 5,000 councillors. The ire, the understandable anger in others, rage, a sense of utter betrayal, good folks, is soon to manifest variously in over 5,000 Australian councillors after the successful efforts of Councillor Adrian McRae in Port Headland Council on Friday night in helping his neighbouring councillor colleagues near and far to all understand. So we have an honourable Australian that is willing to speak up against some communist ideology coming out of the Federal Executive Council. We link the military directly to this, wherein they flex upon the states who hold all of the councils in bankruptcy. This is how the state has been able to dictate across the entire state for the last 75 years of peacekeeping under those Hague and Geneva Conventions that brought about a Nuremberg trial in the very first place. So those good old folk in Canberra have been pestered by me for almost 15 years. And now it comes to fruition as you start to realise they have actually attacked you at war, and they have committed heinous international war crimes in that attack. Where's Tony? Where's Tony? ScoMo, Are you there? You started it all. You're the one that got your little Zionist award for doing it all. Enter Adrian McRae. Adrian McRae is no slouch, now a successful industrialist in WA mining after starting with nothing. Adrian was earlier in the sciences as a specialist in horse medicine, dentistry no less. US qualified years ago, so he is no Johnny-come-lately for those unaware, a very talented man. So, where's Tony? We've got no fucking idea, do we, people? He's off chin-wagging with everyone while he spends all of your money. He's off chin-wagging with everyone while he plans to turn your country into a concrete prison with cameras and AI and automated vehicles and all these things to take away your industry and your shops and lock you further down into some sort of prison yard where they run the show, after their military command did this to you. Didn't you, General Fruin? Having seen the correspondence by Russell Broadbent MP to Tony, the Prime Minister, and especially the science summary contained in the letter of 25th of September, Adrian knew more needed to be done. But first he contacted Dr. David Spiker to ensure he was clearly understanding the true ramifications of Dr. Spiker's DNA contamination findings. Then Councillor McRae made contact with several of the co-signatories and authors of the science summary to verify and clearly understand that the consequences, as stated, truly do represent a clear and present danger to all Australians. A threat that has unfortunately begun to materialise. Armed with a thorough understanding of the situation all Australians now face, whether vaxxed or unvaxxed, as any rapid deterioration in the health of Australians impacts all Australians. Councillor McRae knew the special meeting needed more than the science summary and contamination findings for getting the message understood in terms we can all understand, and which the councillors present needed for thoroughly understanding. So the urgency and purpose of the extensively documented substantive motion would become as clear as day. That required a professor of renown who knows their stuff. We shall return to this part later. The meeting. Video of the entire special meeting will be made available on the Port Headland Council website in the coming days. But for now, the meeting can be seen on Rumble. Thank you, Courage is the Cure, which would be the account that this is posted on. So we have a councillor with a brain, not an idiot like most councillors around the country, has come and put this before the council, but backed it up with evidence before tabling it before a council meeting. This made the council obligated to hear what was put before them. Now, when we talk about a clear and present danger, I want to point something out. Disease X. We can see by this Wikipedia article that Disease X is a placeholder name that was adopted by the foreign interests that Albo follows in 2018 on their short list of blueprint priority diseases to represent a hypothetical unknown pathogen that could cause a future epidemic. Now, when they were discussing this, they were talking about 50% of the population dying from disease X. And when you look at this contamination, they knew exactly what they were doing when they tried to exterminate a population very slowly. If it is true that these lipid things that we discussed before do make their way to the ovaries, do make their way to the brain, then we can see sterilization occurring as well. We can see mutilation occurring as a war crime. We can see an experiment happening as a war crime. So when we look at this, disease X is this body that Albo follows, has a modus operandi that precedes the events that it is triggering. It knows that it is taking this path, and it knows that what we would call collateral damage to a military force under the command responsibility of General Fruin, under the command responsibility of Angus Campbell, under the command responsibility of those above them. And this is very clear. We are looking at an attack on all Australians by a body called a peacekeeping force that has gone outside of the rules that it brought here. So this town meeting is very long, goes for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Especially for you East Coast folk who stayed up burning the midnight oil, the speech for Australia, for mine and to assist everyone here with getting to the nub of Adrian's concern and why this meeting had to go ahead urgently, I have extracted Councillor McRae's speech in support of the motion, a little over 10 minutes. Albanese, take notes. So there's a second video here that then is that shorter 10 minutes. These two videos are this council meeting, and this makes it formal to see that DNA contamination has occurred, except it doesn't go into the modus operandi as to why they would put that into those vials in the first place. We are looking at something a lot larger than what this council can acknowledge. They spend their days working and haven't got the capacity to do the research that we have. So all of the work that I have done backs up this claim, and this claim makes it sure, proof, evidenced that these people in this government are all complicit and have common purpose in a war crime. Now, I'll put the links to these 3 videos in the description. But wait, let's roll it back a little. Adrian mentioned Angus Dalgleish. Before Councillor McRae delivered this extraordinary speech, the meeting was closed to the attending public and online audience for nearly 30 minutes, as Mayor Carter called a confidential session so councillors could watch a certain video Councillor McRae had brought along. So what was that video all about? Enter Professor Angus Dalgleish. Professor Dalgleish, as lead co-signatory of Mr. Broadbent's letter of the 25th, stepped up to break down the science summary that letter contains for the benefit of the Port Headland councillors and the attending public. Here is what the councillors were watching during that confidential session, an address by Professor Dalgleish. Now, I find it strange that they would go into confidential session in a council meeting where they're supposed to represent the people in their district. This would seem to me that the mayor wanted to hide his comments on this, given that he was one of two people that voted against it. I watched this testimony from Professor Dalgleish and only hear again and again and again, cancer, cancer, cancer! This is the nature of the elephant in the room Councillor McRae has now, with the successful passing of the motion, called upon all Australian councils to see has been shown to the Prime Minister Tony weeks ago now, about which Tony and the Canberra mob are saying nothing, nada, zero, zip. A high-def version of Professor Dalglish's video is available in the comments. Next steps. Let's get into some of the detail of what the motion succeeded in achieving for what's happening next. In short, the CEO of Port Headland is now required to undertake the following. So here we have a situation where command line responsibility was informed of something very serious and chose instead to go into silence. And it is now for those military police to break that silence. It is now for those Australian Federal Police to break that silence. I have put this on the record and displayed it very clearly over time. And now we are starting to see others around Australia catch up. All of this evidence goes with what I have laid out in the past 40 or 50 videos. We are looking at command line responsibility. We are looking at a Yamashita protocol. We are looking at a Nuremberg defense. We are looking at war crimes. We are looking at the most heinous crime that has ever occurred on Australian soil. So we have a list of recommendations that have come out of this council meeting and decided on and defined in the closing of this council meeting's minutes. A. Deliver the letter seen at Annexure 1 to the Prime Minister, endorsing the letters of the Honourable Russell Broadbent MP dated 20 and 25th of September 2024, in which Council repeats the call for an immediate suspension of the Pfizer and the Moderna products under the same terms as expressed by Mr. Broadbent. I would go further and say that you need to criminally charge these people with war crimes. And instead of endorsing letters, we should be endorsing the evidence that goes before the Australian Federal Police and the military police so that these people can be held accountable for the serious criminal offences that they carried out, believing that as politicians they had the ultimate rule in the country, which is not the truth. They are obligated to all of those rules that they administer under. B. That Council forthwith circulate to all registered health practitioners and medical clinics operating with the Port Headland local government area a copy of the letter appearing at Annexure 2 to inform all local health practitioners of the report by Dr. Spiker and the findings of the science summary attached to Mr. Broadbent's letter of 25th September 2024. The Council strongly urges practitioners to share this information with patients contemplating receiving any Pfizer or Moderna. The goal is to ensure patients can provide legally valid informed consent. Copies of the letters from Mr. Broadbent MP and Town of Port Headland to the Prime Minister will be attached. This is not full disclosure. This is not giving patients full disclosure. This is not holding doctors accountable for what they have already participated in. This is not holding doctors accountable, given that these drug companies pay these doctors to peddle their drugs. When it comes to nurses, we can shine a different light, given that they were mandated, they were forced at hand. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. But these doctors are well informed and paid to do what they do. C. That Council forthwith circulate to all other Australian local government councils and shires a copy of the letter appearing at Annexure 3. This letter will inform all councils and shires about the findings of Dr. Spiker's report and the science summary, urging them to share the information with health practitioners and clinics in their areas to facilitate informed consent for their residents. The letter will attach the letters from Mr. Broadbent MP and the Council's letter to the Prime Minister, urging all other local government councils and shires to consider sending similar correspondence to the Prime Minister. I don't think that's enough. This has demonstrated that Albanese is complicit and in common purpose to a war crime. This also demonstrates that these health practitioners and clinics are liable to that war crime. Urging these health practitioners and clinics to inform their patients of that drug for their consent is not enough when they have already participated in the crime. D. Contact the Department of Health, Western Australia, and formally present Dr. Spiker's report, the letters from Mr. Broadbent MP and the Council letters to the Prime Minister, using a copy of the letter appearing at Annexure 4, requesting a public response and advice on steps the Department recommends for patients contemplating the receipt of any further Pfizer and Moderna poisons, and advise on steps for public health and advice for medical practitioners. This is where we get serious, because this is now the Department of Health, wherein a Premier and a health so-called expert spouted and threatened and abused you on TV, chasing you to take these poisons, pushing the state to maximise to 90%. We want 90%, they said. We want 90%. Then they locked down borders that were repealed in the Constitution Act. They locked down borders that technically, legally don't exist in the country anymore. And one needs to ask why. One needs to ask what that Australia Act did to a Commonwealth. This is a direct attack on you in your councils by a state that joined a foreign interest in the Australia Act and then served foreign interests in the WHO. This is serious business. that links all the way out of country into all those other countries by some sort of command line responsibility that your Australian Defence Force willingly followed. E. Contact the Minister for Health, Western Australia, Amber Jade Sanderson, to formally present Dr. Spiker's report, the letters from Mr. Broadbent MP, Council's letter to the Prime Minister, and Council's letter to all Australian local government councils and shires, using copy of the letter appearing at Annexure 5, seeking the Minister's public response and recommended actions for patients contemplating the receipt of any further poisons by Pfizer or Moderna, and advice on the steps of public health and advice for practical medical practitioners. So again, it's a war crime, and I guess they need to go through this step-by-step process so that these people can actually be caught out. F. Contact the Commonwealth Department of Health and Aged Care, specifically Deputy Health Secretary Professor Lawler and Health Secretary Blair Comley, presenting Dr. Spiker's report, the letters from Mr. Broadbent MP, Council's letter to the Prime Minister, and Council's letter to all Australian local government councils and shires, using a copy of the letter appearing at Annexure 6, requesting a formal and public response from both officials and recommended actions for patients contemplating the receipt of any further poisons by Pfizer and Moderna, and advice on steps for public health and advice for medical practitioners. Again, it's a war crime, and we're looking at those responsible for that crime within the government. But the councillors here aren't aware of that military behind them. G. Contact the Commonwealth Minister for Health and Aged Care, Mark Butler, presenting Dr. Spiker's report, the letters from Mr. Broadbent MP, Council's letter to the Prime Minister, and Council's letter to all Australian local government councils and shires, using copy of the letter appearing at Annexure 7, requesting a formal and public response from Minister Butler and recommended actions for patients contemplating the receipt of any further poisons by Pfizer and Moderna, and advice on steps for public health and advice for medical practitioners. All of the annexures can be viewed. I'll try and put a link in the description. But, wait a minute. During the special meeting, those annexures were amended to include additional paragraphs for heading off the canned bullshit excuses from the TGA and Health Department when asked about this contamination. We could include ATAGI here. They're the ones that made all of this advice in the first place, a newly created organisation to work on behalf of this corrupted government. The same canned bullshit they recently flicked back at Rebecca Barnett when she asked the TGA to comment on the report of Dr. Spiker. Well, that bullshit don't fly no more, and here's why. Read the text in red below to appreciate the problem the TGA has, and as a consequence, the rest of Australia now has because of the TGA's incompetence or perhaps intentional acts of deception. This red text is amended. Annexure 1 is contained in the other annexures now as well. So we'll go through this letter in a minute. Or perhaps intentional acts of deception. Intentional acts of deception. We are talking about a military exercise where politicians didn't have a say. They did the bidding of outside interests. They did the bidding of their financial masters. They did the bidding of evil men that wanted to control and manipulate all of you in a digital world where your DNA would become your data. So we only have one of these annexias to go through, but it seems like they're all very similar, but targeted at their specific addressees. This one is to the Honourable Anthony Albanese MP, Prime Sinister, Parliament House, Canberra. By email, parliament@pm.gov.au. Dear Prime Minister, dear Prime Sinister, RE, urgent request to suspend Pfizer and Moderna poison products due to DNA contamination. Now, we know that the reason that these men have stayed silent is because they purposely tried to install a genetic sequence into all of you like cattle tags. I write on behalf of the town of Port Headland to bring to your immediate attention a report by David Spiker, PhD, which represents disturbing findings of synthetic DNA contamination in Pfizer and Moderna poisons. Dr. Spiker's report reveals that the contamination levels in the poisons exceeded Australia's TGA limit by up to 145 times, with DNA fragments capable of integrating into human cells. Alarmingly, the Pfizer poisons also contains SV40 promoter sequences which were not disclosed to regulators and are known to facilitate genomic integration, posing severe risks such as cancer and other long-term health consequences. Like I said, they wanted to put a cattle tag marker into you that was patented and deemed to be non-natural by a USA courtroom. Council acknowledges the letters from the Honourable Russell Broadbent MP dated 20th September 2024 and 25th September 2024, which were co-signed by over 50 of the world's leading doctors, professors, scientists, and legal experts from Europe, North America, and Australia. We extend our gratitude to Mr. Broadbent for raising awareness of Dr. Spiker's critical findings. So now we come to this section in red that was added so as the TGA couldn't give a bullshit excuse. It has become increasingly clear that the testing methods employed by the TGA have failed to adequately address the risks posed by synthetic DNA contamination in Pfizer and Moderna poisons. The TGA's reliance on outdated guidelines such as ICHQ2-R2, which do not account for the unique nature of mod RNA platforms, which has resulted in significant shortcomings. These guidelines were arbitrarily cited by the TGA to dismiss findings by scientists like Dr. Spiker, rather than embracing the necessary new scientific approaches to detect synthetic DNA in these products. Notably, the TGA has been using testing methodologies as documented in TGA FOI 5286 that only target a small segment of the plasmid DNA, failing to detect the bulk of the contamination, particularly those fragments under 200 base pairs where the highest risk lies. Alarmingly, Moderna, through its own patent filings, had specifically warned about the inadequacy of such testing methods for detecting residual DNA, especially DNA encapsulated in lipid nanoparticles, LNPs. Despite this warning, the TGA has relied on these insufficient methods, which grossly underdetect the true extent of contamination. Moderna's patents also highlighted the risks of insertional mutagenesis and carcinogenesis, that these serious risks remain inadequately addressed by the TGA's current testing practices. Further, despite prior warnings and international scrutiny, the TGA has not conducted proper tests to detect LNP encapsulated DNA, nor performed thorough investigations into the risks of DNA integration into human cells. This raises serious concerns about the TGA's capacity to protect the public from the known dangers of synthetic DNA contamination. The only way to begin remedying this situation is for the TGA to acknowledge these failures and to urgently conduct comprehensive testing in line with new scientific methods to either confirm or disprove the findings of Dr. Spiker and other eminent scientists. Immediate action in the lab is necessary to prevent further harm. Now, I'm going to take this a step further. That lab needs to be shut down. They did something very heinous to you that is called mutilation. And under Rule 92 of the International Humanitarian Law, it is a serious offence. This includes 25 years in jail and the death penalty for those in command line responsibility. This is not a joke. This is now being confirmed that synthetic DNA markers were attempted to be installed into your body as cattle tags, clearly demonstrated by the HSB's advertising that your DNA will become your data. This shows complicity. This shows common purpose. This shows joint commission. This shows genocide. This shows forced medical procedure. This shows a full medical experimentation. And that's clear, given that several ministers have already been caught out telling the world that it was the world's largest experiment. If this doesn't speak loudly to you to start reporting those crimes to the Australian Federal Police, to start reporting those crimes to the military police, for mandates on the military personnel, for mandates on the police force, for mandates on the nursing. This is a serious, serious thing that we are opening a door to. This could see hundreds, if not thousands, of people in this country arrested for being complicit in it. This is also technically at law a conspiracy. These people did conspire to harm you. These people did conspire to do something worldwide. So you can see what the TGA has not been doing. It has not been testing for DNA contamination. Instead, these criminals, these mugs, have been using a test for DNA contamination which Moderna told them didn't work. Yeah, you just read that right. Yet somehow, when Dr. David Spiker produces world-leading test methods that reveal the synthetic DNA contamination hidden in the LNPs, these mugs at the TGA instead start waving their hands in the air to misdirect everyone with outdated guidelines for validating test processes. Yet the TGA never followed the same guidelines. The TGA instead has all along been using a test method Moderna said was rubbish. Yet the TGA has the hide to try, and say Dr. David Spiker's work is rubbish and not to be relied upon, when the only ones performing shyster science are the TGA, and they know we know it. I wouldn't call it shyster science. I'd call it a war crime. And I'd say that they tried to throw their hands up in the air and misdirect everyone because they know they're guilty of that war crime. Councillor Adrian McRae also cottoned on to the grift and bullshit flowing out of the TGA as spruiked by their media propaganda department. That's Albo's media propaganda department. That's the Federal Executive's media propaganda department. That includes the ABC. And Andrew McRae broke this all down at the special meeting last Friday, and the councillors there understood we have a lying TGA that has been caught out. Thus why they agreed to Councillor McRae's mini motion calling for the amendments to get the text in red inserted above. These last moment amendments were super important because now all this material is being sent to all 537 Australian councils. They will all know too what bullshit to not accept from the lying and deceitful TGA, which is in nothing but damage control now. They've been caught out. Special thanks go to Australia's most intrepid independent investigative journalist, Rebecca Barnett, because it was she who put in the right FOI application with the TGA that saw them fumble with their black marker redactions and leave just enough pages exposed for the world to see that they are purposely using exact DNA contamination test that one of the manufacturers told them not to use. As Hoodie and John Lato would say, you just couldn't make this stuff up. No, you couldn't make this up. This is so evil that it's a war crime. And I don't think many people around the world want to commit war crimes. We already have a Brereton report in this country. We already have Justice Lonergan's findings in this country. And we already have all the evidence that I've put on the table to demonstrate who was in command line responsibility for all of this. Okay, that's about it for now, folks. I, together with Councillor Blanco, will be following up with the Port Headland CEO to ensure all the letters detailed in Annexias 1 through 7 above get sent properly and don't end up in some mailbag by the side of the road or lost to spam folders. We will keep you appraised. Apologies this post did not come sooner, but I needed to survey some issues before putting this note together. While I must also admit to labouring under a shell-shocking hangover yesterday after tippling a few into the wee hours Friday night with Councillor McRae and Councillor for Karratha, Brenton Johansson, who did the long drive up to attend the special meeting. Noting the urgency of the motion's information, so he came to lend a hand and his voice in support. As too do we hope over 5,000 other councillors will do across Australia soon. Get revved up, if not downright angry as well. Probably enough to tell this Canberra mob too, that Tony, old boy, better get to quickly doing something. Yes, as Angus Dalgleish has made clear, we have already entered a health crisis, and this Canberra mob has to get off their collective asses and start fixing this mess they made if we are to survive as a country. Thank you. Please share widely. Right, so I don't know what a Substack is, but this is a Substack page. And this closing argument is not what I would have said. You don't have to get angry. You have to report the war crimes to the Australian Federal Police. If you have been injured, report it. If you have been threatened, report it. If you have been tortured, report it. If anything that fits in with the Criminal Code 1995 Volume 2 applies, report it. Read Volume 2 of the Criminal Code and report the crimes. Second to that, you can inform your local councillors in your districts or shires as to your standing on this matter, and you can inform them that you know full well that legally this is a serious criminal offence. This is an international war crime. They are a foreign administering power. They are obligated to those Hague and Geneva Conventions. They are serious war criminals. And now is your opportunity to speak up, put it on the record, and see that all of your information goes towards a serious criminal case in the matter that the military police are obligated to go through. The Brereton report already defined that this Australian government was obligated to go through reports of war crimes and see them heard in Australian courts. This is demonstrated by that actual Brereton report that laid out these demands. Albanese hasn't got a leg to stand on anymore, and you have to consider that they tried to undermine your country with a voice and an Aboriginal minority population over and above the rest of a population in a serious act of apartheid. Now, when you fill out a government form and it asks you if you are an Aboriginal, that in itself is an act of apartheid and an international criminal offence that has been going on in this country for almost 50 years. They have been dividing a people on purpose to undermine and collapse your country, to bring in immigrants to fulfill their corporate structure. We saw this by the Federal Executive Council and the Prime Minister and Cabinet putting together a corporate plan for 2025. You have an opportunity to speak up now. You have an opportunity to report these crimes to your local police, your Australian Federal Police, and the military police. If you suffered a mandate in either your job as a nurse, a police officer, or a military officer, I would be reporting that to the military police immediately. You have been poisoned. You have been harmed. You have been attacked. You have been lied to. You have been manipulated, coerced, abused. You have seen these premiers of state constantly threaten you on the TV, trying to get to 90 and 100%. This is your opportunity. I'd suggest you grab it with both hands and take it. Now, lastly, if you're aiding and abetting as a company, as an individual, you are sort of liable to everything that you have promoted and pushed out. Here we have Bill Gates saying that the world faces two options: a major war or another pandemic in less than 30 years. What he means is pick a choice, because they want to cull the population. They want to cull the population in either a major war where they send your children off to be bombed to death, or they release another poison into the world and see that cull you all off. Bill Gates sat down with your Prime Minister relative to these poisons. Bill Gates has planned through the Gates Foundation to push all of these poisons around the world. Bill Gates made a shit ton of money off this game that has now started to open up and be displayed for what it is. It is attempting to cattle tag all of you into a digital system that you will never be able to leave. It is taking your freedom away from you and treating you like you will always be a ward of the state, where the state will dictate your life like your parents. This is because they have pushed your gods out of the way and moved into your governments and created these offences while in that command. We won't stop. We ask you to join us. We ask you to stand up. We ask you to report all the crimes that you witness. We ask you not to be complacent on this matter. We ask you to rise and unite. We ask you to stand together. We ask you to support each other, because coming into the future, this is going to be a difficult ride. A Nuremberg trial should commence, and military police within the Australian Defence Force should start making arrests of that command line responsibility as fast as they can. This evidence cannot go swept under the table. This evidence is dire. This evidence is important, and this evidence demonstrates very clearly what I have been saying for the last 5, 6, 7 years. Just because you're waking up to it post-fact didn't mean some of us knew all about it before it started. So thanks for listening. That was a big one. That was an important one. Use it to kick some goals. Use it to discover that we are a united people and we can stand up and make these people accountable for their crimes.